Every country on Earth was found by somebody. Most of those stories are lost. New Zealand's is not. And in the Maori tradition, the finding of the last great landmass humans ever settled did not begin as a search for land at all. It began as a chase. A navigator in a single ocean-going canoe, pursuing a giant octopus across the widest stretch of open water on the planet, day after day, horizon after horizon, until, at the far end of the hunt, a coastline rose out of the sea that no human eye had ever looked at. His name was Kupe, and, in the tradition of Aotearoa, this is how the human story of New Zealand begins, not with a colonist, but with a hunter who refused to let a monster go. Start where the tradition starts. Hawaiki. Hawaiki is the homeland, the warm islands of ancestral memory that Maori tradition looks back to, the place the ancestors sailed from. It is where Kupe's story opens, and in the telling, life there had a problem. The fishing had failed. Not from weather and not from luck. Something was taking the bait from the lines, stripping the hooks, ruining the catch, and doing it, the tradition says, with intent. The culprit was no ordinary creature. It was a great octopus, and it belonged, the way a hunting dog belongs to a hunter, to a man named Muturangi, a rival of Kupe. Te Wheke-a-Muturangi, the octopus of Muturangi, a monster with an owner. Every ruined catch was, in effect, a message from one man to another, and Kupe answered it the way the heroes of this tradition answer things. He didn't negotiate with Muturangi. He loaded his canoe, gathered his household, and set out onto the open Pacific to kill the octopus itself. But before the chase begins, the tradition itself asks us to pause, because the old records do not agree on why Kupe left Hawaiki, and the second version is far darker. In the telling that Governor George Gray wrote down in 1855, there is no ruined fishing at the start. There is a fishing trip. Kupe is out on the sea with his cousin Hotarapa, and Kupe's line fouls, or so he claims. He asks Hotarapa to dive down and free it, and the record is blunt about what that request really was. A mere stratagem upon the part of Kupe that he might obtain possession of Kuramarotini, who was Hotarapa's wife. Hotarapa dives, and the moment he is under the water, Kupe cuts the anchor rope and paddles for shore with all his strength. Hotarapa surfaces to an empty sea, calls after the canoe, "Oh, Kupe, bring the canoe back here to take me in," and Kupe does not turn around. Hotarapa drowns, and Kupe flees across the ocean with Kuramarotini in, and this detail lands like a stone. Her canoe. Matahurua was hers. So the tradition hands us two Kupes, the monster hunter answering an enemy, and the man running from what he had done. Different iwi, different tellings, centuries of retelling between them, and this channel's rule is to show you the record, not to pick your version for you. Both versions agree on what happened next. A canoe called Matahurua, far out on the Pacific, with Kupe and Kuramarotini aboard, and an ocean ahead of them that no one had ever crossed to its end. Hold the scale of this in your mind. The Pacific is not a sea, it is a third of the planet, and somewhere on it, a canoe built by hand, hull, lashings, sail, is following a creature that swims beneath the surface and never has to rest on land. This is the heart of the tradition. The pursuit was so long that it carried Kupe beyond every island he knew, beyond the edges of the known world entirely. The Encyclopedia of New Zealand puts it in one line. The pursuit was of such length that it brought him to New Zealand. Think about what a chase like that means for the people in the canoe. Every day, the water under you is deeper than any ancestor has sounded. Every night, the stars shift a little further from the sky you memorized as a child. The octopus runs on, and the hunter has to decide, every single dawn, whether to turn back toward everything he knows or follow the wake of the thing he swore to kill. Kupe follows. In the tradition, he always follows. And then, at the end of the longest hunt in the story of the Pacific, land, a long coastline under cloud, high, green, cold, utterly silent. In Gray's record, Kupe did what a navigator does with a new coast. He worked it. He coasted entirely around the islands, around both of them, charting bays and channels as he went. And he explored it like a man who knew no one would believe him otherwise. Gray's record says he examined the different openings he found running up into the country, the sounds, the channels, the harbor mouths, the way a fisherman reads a new reef. He wasn't sightseeing. He was building, in his memory, the thing his whole legend would come to rest on, a working knowledge of a coastline nobody else on Earth knew existed. The country was empty. Kupe had chased a monster off the edge of his world and found a new one, but the octopus was still alive, and the hunt ends the way the tradition loves best, not with strength, but with a trick. The creature had fled down the east coast. Gray's record has it bolting from a cavern near Castle Point and made for the churning water between the two islands, Raukawa, Cook Strait, where the Pacific forces itself through a gap and the currents run like rivers. There, in the moving water, Te Wheke-a-Muturangi waited. As Kupe drove his canoe up the current, the monster heard the paddles coming. It rose beneath them and lifted its arms out of the sea, arms lined with suckers, each one big enough to fold around the hull, to catch and devour the canoe, the record says, men and all. Kupe fought it the obvious way first, chopping at the great arms as they came aboard. And it wasn't working. The monster was too fierce to care. A creature that size doesn't feel an axe the way a man needs it to. So Kupe stopped fighting the monster's strength and started fighting its mind. He took the biggest thing he could lift, an immense hollow calabash, the vessel he carried his drinking water in, and threw it overboard. The octopus saw a large shape hit the water and did exactly what Kupe needed. It took the calabash for the canoe. It flung itself on the decoy, rearing its whole body out of the sea to crush the gourd beneath it. And in doing so, for one moment, it showed the hunter everything. Kupe stood up in his canoe, axe in hand, with the monster stretched out of the water in front of him, and struck one tremendous blow and cut the creature in two. The chase that had crossed the widest ocean on Earth ended in a strait between two unnamed islands, on a trick a child could understand. Make the monster attack the water jug. And then the noise stops. The monster is dead, the strait runs quiet, and Kupe is standing at the bottom of a country with nobody in it. The tradition is emphatic about this emptiness, and it gives it a detail that is almost eerie. In Gray's record, in all his exploring, Kupe found exactly 2 inhabitants in the whole land. Not people, birds, a kokako, the gray ghost-voiced songbird of the deep forest, and a tawaiwaka, a fantail. Sit with that image, the first human being ever to walk this country, and the entire population that comes out to meet him is one solemn songbird and one small flitting bird with a fanned tail, dancing around the stranger the way fantails still dance around walkers on New Zealand tracks today. And if you've been with this channel from the start, that second bird should raise the hair on your neck, because the fantail is the same small bird whose laugh, in the Maui tradition, woke the goddess of death and ended the greatest hero of the Pacific. In this telling, it was also the welcoming committee, first witness of the first discoverer, undoing of the last great trickster. Small bird, enormous resume. The accounts of Kupe's voyage are taken, the encyclopedia notes, as the tradition's evidence that the land was uninhabited, in most tellings, the emptiest thing a navigator ever found, a whole world holding its breath, waiting for people. What does a discoverer do with an empty country? Kupe didn't settle it, he named it. All down the coasts of the tradition, Kupe's voyage survives as names, a trail of them, still on the map. He explored the channels of the strait and named the racing entrance Kurateao. In Wellington's great harbor, 2 small islands carry the names Matiu and Mākaro, his daughters, remembered in stone in a country their father found at the end of a monster hunt. And far in the north there is the most famous name of all, a long harbor where, the tradition says, Kupe finally turned his canoe around, and it has been called, ever since, Te Wheke-a-Kupe, the great returning place of Kupe. Hokianga, the name is a verb. It means he went home. Gray's record puts the whole idea in one line, thus he left his marks here. The first human chapter of New Zealand's story was written not in buildings or bones, but in names. A map of one voyage, still legible after all the centuries, if you know what you're reading. Then Kupe did the thing that, in the tradition, no other voyager managed. He crossed the whole ocean back. From Hokianga, the canoe turned north into the open Pacific. Back across the water no one else had crossed. Back to Hawaiki, back to the world that had watched him vanish over the horizon chasing an octopus. In the tradition, he is the only voyager ever to make the return journey. Discovery is one miracle. The round trip is another. And Hawaiki was full of trouble he had left behind. In Gray's record, Kupe returns to find Turi, a chief on the edge of a blood feud, needing somewhere to run to. And now, for the first time in the history of the world, somewhere else existed. Kupe told of the islands he had found, vast, green, and empty, and gave the course to reach them. Turi's canoe, the Aotearoa, was dragged down to the shore, in Gray's record, by night, in secrecy, the way you launch a boat when you are running for your life. And it sailed, out past the reef, out past the last known island, following Kupe's discoveries toward the land at the end of the wake. And here, Gray's record adds one last very human note. The voyagers didn't entirely trust the directions. They second-guessed the great navigator, thinking, the record says, that he might be deceiving them. Picture that, the only man alive who had seen the other side of the ocean, handing over the most valuable knowledge in the Pacific, and the people staking their lives on it, still wondering if it was a trick. Perhaps, if the darker telling of Kupe's departure was the one they knew, they had their reasons. They made the crossing all the same, and behind them, in the tradition, would come the great migration canoes whose names the iwi of Aotearoa still carry in their genealogies. Kupe himself never sailed back. He had chased a monster to a new world, mapped it, named it, and handed it, as a set of directions, to everyone who came after. In the tradition, that is the whole shape of the man, the one who opens the door and does not walk through it. That is the story the tradition tells. And it's worth saying plainly what kind of story it is. This is not archaeology. The encyclopedia itself is careful here. The sailing directions attributed to Kupe are open to doubt as history, and the tellings differ from iwi to iwi. You have heard two of them tonight. What is certain is what the tradition has done with him, made Kupe the first name in the human story of Aotearoa, the ancestor invoked by harbors and headlands the length of the country, and as a story, it is nearly perfect. A monster that ruins the fishing, or a crime that needs an ocean to outrun, a chase across a third of the earth, a battle in a strait won with a water jug, an empty country whose only citizens were two birds, a trail of names, and one impossible voyage home, carrying the most consequential travel directions ever spoken. The birds Kupe met are still here, the names are still on the maps, and the little fantail that greeted the first human in New Zealand went on, in another story we have told, to end the mightiest hero of the Pacific with a single laugh. This channel tells these traditions one voyage at a time, sourced, checked, and kept to the tellings as they were recorded. The story of Maui and of the making of the world itself are already waiting for you. The canoe is on the water. Climb in.